It was just special. There was just the shows that happened there, the people that went to the shows, the social aspect of it. It was unique. I do miss it. I think sometimes I think this conversation has made me realize that I miss it more than I realized. Because it really wasn't just about the shows. It was really about just the feeling. And again, the way that it allowed so many new comedians, especially queer identifying comedians, that space really gave a lot of them their first shot.
Hello, I am Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, a podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories they created there, and the people that they used to know. Psychic City was a bar in a dingy basement in Montreal that may or may not have been run legally and existed for a few short years before closing in 2018. I caught up with comedian, singer, and co-host of her own podcast named Chosen Family, Tranna Wintour, to talk all about queer kids struggling in suburbia, creating without the pressure of financial success, and Trannavision, the night she ran at Psychic City. Oh, and full disclosure, I should let you know that we prattle on for a while about Showgirls and how it's probably the best movie ever made. So, Trannavision.
Mm-hmm.
If I was like visiting and I was looking at going out one night and I wanted to go somewhere fun, how would you pitch Trannavision to me? What happens?
Well, I don't have an elevator pitch, and I never have
Ah,
an elevator pitch for anything that I do, which I should really learn to be better at. But essentially, Tranavision is watching all of the awful movies that you love and grew up with and watching them in a really new way, pretty much. So basically, I'll give you an example. So I would choose the movies based on the movies that I've grown up with and that I really have an affinity for, but that are technically awful movies. So Showgirls is like the prime
I
example.
mean,
Although,
what is
as
technically awful about Showgirls? That's an amazing film.
well, that's what I was just going to say. I think that the discussion on Showgirls has really evolved, and now there seems to be like an academic appreciation, which I was on board with at one point, but I'm like, no, we must keep it a bad movie. Why does it have to? Why do we have to? Why does it have to be critically
Yeah,
appreciated?
why why do we have to enjoy it ironically when it is just good?
Yeah, well, exactly. But I think there's nothing wrong with enjoying it ironically too. And sometimes things should be allowed to just be bad. It's like suddenly when Showgirls as a phenomenon became so big, people
Mm.
wanted to legitimize it. But it doesn't need to be legitimized, you know? It doesn't, our love for it doesn't need to be justified or explained. But other movies that we've done too were both of the Sex and the City movies, which in my own life, I mean, I watch those movies like twice a year, every year. Um, and we also did Cruel Intentions and I Know What You Did Last Summer and The Devil Wears Prada.
Ah.
The sort of key is that the movies can't be self-aware. Uh, because one time early on, I chose Spice World. So basically, when I choose the movie, we screen the movie, and myself and a panel of three other comedians, two of us sit on each side of the screen, and we do live commentary as we're watching the movie. And the live commentary really varies from just sort of straight up commentary, and often it devolves into us sort of pretending to be the characters and doing dialogue over the movie. It's just sort of a mix of all of that. And in a weird way, it's also allowed us to sort of re-examine these movies, which most of them are from the 90s and the early 2000s, and sort of look at them through today's lens, not expecting them to, you know, be where we're at in terms of discussions about sexuality and gender and race and all of those things. I don't think it's fair to sort of, look at things from the past with the standards that we have now. But it's still fun to look at, and there's humor in looking at how far we've come and evolved in terms of certain subject matter and themes. But all to say,
But no.
is
So
that,
you were saying that they have to not be self-aware because
oh,
you were
right,
showing
sorry,
Spice World.
yes. And so early on, we chose Spice World, and it just didn't work because Spice World is so self-aware. Like, no one made that movie thinking it was a good movie, like that wasn't their
But again,
intention.
it
Like,
is a good movie. I
and
mean,
I
there's
think
so
it
many
is
quotable
amazing.
lines in that film.
Yeah. Oh no, I loved it. But they were so irreverent in their
Yeah, yeah.
approach, So you can't really do irreverence on top of irreverence.
Yes, yeah,
It
yeah.
just it's not funny. So I mean, it was still fun to watch Spice World with the audience, but it wasn't as funny as our usual shows where, we pick on things that were made very earnestly,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
were not made tongue in cheek, that were not made in an irreverent sort of approach. Like Pretty Woman, like Pretty Woman was genuine, everyone involved in that movie thought they were making something good.
Yeah, yeah. That really doesn't hold up to scrutiny in 2020, does it?
At all. But that's what makes it so fun. That's what makes it so fun to watch. And there's something about that nostalgic connection that is really beautiful at the shows. And like, it's sort of like having a movie party with all your friends. Like we used to sort of, the way that we used to go to each other's houses and go in the basement and watch these movies, and now doing it as quote unquote adults. It I don't know, it just brings back some of that childhood joy, but with an adult perspective on things.
And so, did Trannavision start at Psychic City?
It did. I had the idea, not that the idea for the show is anything new. I mean, this format has been done in many different versions by many different people, but as such a pop culture junkie, for me, even in my stand-up comedy, there's always an aspect of pop culture that's involved because that's just what I've been interested in my whole life. I don't know why. It just has always been this obsession. So I wanted to do a show that would really allow me to dive into my obsessions. And comedy friend of mine named Rachel, who's equally obsessed with a lot of the same movies that I was, when I was telling her about my idea for Trannavision, she told me about Psychic City because at the time it was being run by her cousin, because I was looking for a space to do it. Because technically, I'm not legally allowed to do this show. You have to get the rights to do a public screening of a movie. So I needed somewhere that was going to be underground and somewhere where I could get around that. And then she told me about Psychic City, like this underground space that was being run by her cousin. And I went to check it out, and it was just the perfect fit. It literally was in a basement.
And so, let's use that as the jumping off. Tell us what it was like. So you'd go downstairs to get into the venue?
Yeah. So it was in this building on Saint Laurent, close to the corner of Pine in Montreal. I forget what the exact building number is. I used to know it by heart because every time I'd make my Facebook event pages, I always had to type in the address. So I used to know that address by heart. I think it was 49 something. But on Saint Laurent, not too high up. And it was in, from the outside, a very average looking building. There were lofts and people living in that building. It was the majority of that building was residential spaces, people actually living there. And on the main floor of the building, there was a gym, this like privately owned gym that smelled like my high school gym. So every time I had to walk in the building, I had to walk past this gym on the first floor.
Describe this smell to me.
Oh God, it's so hard to describe. It's just kind of funky and stale and a bit moldy, a bit like my high school, I think, was built in the 70s. So it just sort of carries the funk of like 35 years of teenagers.
And so this smell brings back traumatic memories.
Yes, because gym
Yeah.
class was horrible.
Yes,
Just like,
I'm right there with you. Yeah.
yeah. So every time I would walk into the building that Psychic City was in, I'd walk into the building, you make a right, the gym was right at that turn, and the door was usually open, and there was a class going on, so I'd always get a whiff of that gym.
And some terrible music pumping out as well, no doubt.
Surely. Then there was like a little elevator that was for the people living in the building. I don't think that elevator actually went down to the basement. It only went to the higher up floors. And then next to the elevator was there was some stairs to go down towards the basement. And actually at the top of the stairs, there was a gate in front of the door. So usually someone was already there, so the gate was opened. But later on, I had to like do some of I would have to set up the venue myself, which I really hated. So like I'd have to unlock it and stuff. But at the beginning, when I first got to Psychic City, all of those sort of logistical things were taken care of.
But wait. So you had like the keys and you had the space to yourself and you could like create your own music videos and dance around and you hated it?
Well, because I was always a bit scared of that venue, because it was kind of creepy. And
Oh.
I didn't want to I wasn't scared when I was there like with people, but if I had to go there alone and like turn on all the lights and like set things up, like I don't know, that would stress me out. That would
Ah,
stress me out.
interesting.
But they were really great. Like as Psychic City went on, like a lot of people had the key and you could sort of they were really open. You could really do what you wanted with the space. It was really a space that existed to, allow people the freedom to create the kind of events that they wanted to create without having to pay like an astronomical fees. Venues are so
Mm,
expensive.
mm. And
Um,
okay, so we're going down the stairs, then what happens?
so you go down the stairs, and then you reach the bottom. It's not that far down. And you enter this, I don't even know how to describe it. It kind of looks like something you would have seen in like an underground punk movie from the 80s. Like all the walls are graffitied. It kind of like the main color of the walls was this sort of like mint green and just like a lot of like black writing graffiti, like just sort of all over the place, all over the place. And then there's another gate that leads to the Psychic City space because down in the basement, which I didn't know for a long time, so I was going to Psychic City for months and months and months, thinking that it was the only space down there. But when you reach the bottom of the stairs and you make a sort of slight left towards Psychic City, if you go right, there's this other door, and it leads to, I mean, I can't even tell you how big this underground world was underneath this building. Um, but basically, Psychic City itself, I'll just keep describing Psychic City and I'll tell you about that other side of the underground
I
world
hope it's a
after.
sex dungeon because you're building it up.
Well, no,
Okay,
it
well,
looked
we'll
like
get there. We'll get there.
we'll get there. But then you go into Psychic City, the ceilings are very low. There's all these pipes that are exposed along the ceiling. And within the Psychic City space itself, there's also a lot of graffiti, but it's a bit more artful. There's like illustrations on the wall. And but it's dirty. It's really dark down there. There's no fire escape. So it was a hazard in many ways. And I had a friend once who came to see Trannavision, and it was her first time at Psychic City, and she had a panic attack. Like she had to leave. The space gave her a panic attack. And I
Oh.
think the first time that I went down there, I mean, I didn't have a panic attack, but you do feel claustrophobic. Like the ceilings are very low. And it's very dark down there. There's no windows. There's nothing. It kind of looks like an unfinished basement, like the floor is, I mean, there's no tiles, there's no carpet, it's just sort of cement, it's all
Mm.
concrete. Um, and but they did a good job of like making it kind of shabby cute, with these sort of like, colorful lights, that made it look a little bit more cheerful. There's a stage, but the stage is also very low to the ground. It's just like a slight elevation from the ground because again, the ceilings are so low. You can't
Yeah.
really have a stage that's high up. So the stage is very much on the same, level as the ground. And there was a little backstage area, behind the stage where there was a lot of band equipment. There were I think like two drum kits in there. There were some random mannequins, just also like some like old sofas and old chairs, bookshelves with like old books. Like there was a lot of junk. There was a lot of junk, old lamps,
Oh,
bean bags, just a lot of cords, a lot of wires. Everything was just very exposed. It really looked like this sort of, just unkept basement, just that, where people had been throwing their shit for decades. So very
amazing.
trashy, very, just a mix of like just all kinds of crap.
Um,
But it had a charm. It really had a charm. Like it didn't, there was a cool energy in there.
and so next door.
So next door, so the only reason that I ever found out about the next door is because one time we were doing Trannavision, and there was a band that had their jam session that same night, which was very rare. Like we had never encountered this before, but they were playing this like they were just playing so loud, and it was like this really intense like melodyless punk music. So it just sounded like raging noise, basically. And we tried to keep on with Tranavision, like just pretend that we weren't hearing it, but it was really difficult. So we actually like paused the movie. And then we went I was too scared to go alone. So my friend Rachel, who was on the panel that night, she came with me. And so we opened the door that was on the other side of, where you go down the first set of stairs.
Mm.
And I mean, you open that door, and I thought, there might be like a room or two, but it's like, it almost looks like an underground parking garage. It was enormous, the amount of space that was down there. Like, I just couldn't believe that all of that existed under this random building in Montreal that people were living in. And then we just had to basically like follow our ear to find where the music was coming from. And we ended up down this like long hallway, and we found the room, and we knocked at the door, sort of shaking in our boots, not knowing like who the fuck was going to answer this door. And we're just two, girls, and like not to like weaken that, but we're not like fighters. We're not rough and tumble. We're not the rough and tumble kind of girls. So we just didn't know what we were about to encounter. And I was definitely scared. Rachel's a bit more of a badass than I am. So I felt safe with Rachel. And then this guy opened the door. To be honest, I don't even really remember what he looks like, but I just remember getting a glimpse into their jam space. And it looked like a kill chamber, honestly. Like there were like, it was just all gray cement and like dirt, and it just was so fucked up. And we asked them if they could, that we were doing a show and that we were going to be done really soon. And I think they stopped playing for a little bit. Like they weren't nice, but they weren't as mean and scary as we thought they might be. But I just had no idea that on the other side of this door that I had always walked past, that there was like this whole other world.
And so I really don't need to know this, but I'm interested anyway. On the ground floor, there was no residential space.
No,
Oh,
no.
okay. Because I was going to say, like, like first of all, having a venue in the same building as flats always causes problems, as far as I'm aware.
Oh, for
But
sure.
like having a rehearsal space as well.
Well, things did. So you bring up a really good point, and that's part of how Psychic City ended. So I'm not fully aware of the entire history of the space, but from what I remember hearing from the people that were running it, like I don't remember how Rachel's cousin became to be the person running the space.
Mm.
I don't know how they inherited it. I don't know who they got it from or why they wanted it. But it was a space that has existed for decades. People have been using the space that became Psychic City, since I believe the 70s.
Like
There
as a
were like,
bar.
but like as many different things as a bar, as an underground venue, as a drug den, as like a rave club. Like this was never a legal space,
Hmm.
or it was never you like whoever was paying the rent on it. It was very rarely ever used legally. So people, I guess, the people who have been the sort of tenants of the Psychic City space over all these years, um, were doing with it what they wanted to. And then when Rachel's cousin took over, they wanted to make it a sort of venue.
Hmm.
But I mean, it was not a legal space.
Yeah. But how could it exist for so long?
Because I don't know. Well, because I think part of it is that it always, when things would go wrong, so when whoever was running the space was busted, they would give up whatever operation they were running. And then someone new would take over that lease, and then they would start doing what they wanted to do with it. So I think there's been these sort of intermissions, like I think there's been times where that space is a little bit dormant and then someone takes over the lease again and then starts doing something with it.
And
Because
so
that
like
is
when
sort of what started happening towards the end of Psychic City is that we never knew who it was, but there was someone who was calling the cops on the space quite frequently. And it just became too risky to run the space. So they had to shut it down.
and so would the police come and like break up, or would they just come and kind of act intimidating?
I think it was that they would come intimidating. I was never there when the police showed up because my shows were always quite tame and quiet.
Mm, mm.
We were just watching a movie and it was people laughing. So it was never anything really disruptive. But from memory, from hearing from the other people, especially the people who really took care more of the administrative side of running that space, it was more just intimidating, but I think they were getting warnings. And, like at the shows, we were trying to sell drinks and stuff. So it just became too risky for everyone involved to keep using the space that way.
And so did you like have notice that it was going to close, or did it just close overnight?
No, it closed overnight. So um, I remember, I think it was a friend who also used to produce shows there that messaged me, or I might have seen the post directly myself on Facebook. But there was no real warning. The only thing that I knew was that things were becoming sort of precarious and that it was becoming more and more difficult to run the space.
Hmm.
Um, but no, it was really from one day to the next. It was just like Psychic City is no more.
And how did that feel?
I really was devastated because Trannavision, and it wasn't only Trannavision, there were so many comedians in the city, particularly queer comedians
Hmm.
and female comedians who were really using Psychic City in a way to create shows that they had always wanted to make, that there never really seemed to be room for anywhere else, especially in the more conventional comedy spaces, which are typically spaces run by straight white men. And I really believe that Psychic City is what gave birth to the queer comedy scene in Montreal. It allowed this community to express themselves in a way that we just were never able to before. And I think so many queer people in Montreal felt like the shows that were going on at Psychic City was a space where they felt comfortable and safe to do comedy.
Mm.
So I think that Psychic City was really monumental in what it did, not just for the time that it existed, but just for what it gave to everyone who created in that space.
Yeah.
So at the time, it was the only space that was really like that, especially on the English side of things, because Montreal is a bilingual city and Anglophones are a minority. And so the Anglophone art scene is a very, very small scene. So it finally felt like with Psychic City, we just had this blank canvas that we could really do whatever we wanted to do. There was a comedy collective in Montreal called the Brunch Club that also used to produce a lot of shows at Psychic City. One of the best shows that I ever saw, they had produced, and it was basically like those old TV dating shows.
Ah.
Um, like with a host and like, you know, with a bachelor or bachelorette, and there were like three contenders that were like hidden behind this partition. And watching it live, it was just like, I don't like that was one of the nights that I think I've laughed the most in my life. Like it was just so brilliant, but you'd never really see a show like that anywhere else. Like people were getting really experimental with their comedy, and it was just so great to see. So when and also like, you know, Psychic City is where I was doing a lot of my shows almost exclusively for like a year. And I was so attached to that space and the freedom that that space gave to me. So when I saw that post, or when I had heard that it was closed, I was really sad. But even I think before feeling sad, just panicked. Like, where the fuck am I going to do my shit now?
Mm.
Like, there's nowhere else like this. Where can I possibly do what I do? So I was terrified before I was sad.
Ah. And how did that then shake out?
So if I remember correctly, I think that I had already announced the Jurassic Park edition of Trannavision. So like that was like already like planned. I think it was planned for like the week after the announcement that it was closed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I still really wanted to do it. And my friend Sasha, who ran the Brunch Club Comedy Collective, she really helped me find a sort of temporary alternative venue to do it in. I forget what it was called, the venue that we did it in, but it was a legitimate venue. It was the first time Trannavision was above ground. Um, and it went amazingly well. But I sort of knew that I wouldn't be able to keep doing it at that space. So I had a few months where I wasn't doing Trannavision. It was sort of on pause until
Mm.
I could find the right space for it.
Mm. Um, and I wanted to talk about this like spirit of a venue or like the vibe of a venue because when we were talking like before the interview you were saying that Psychic City wasn't like exclusively a queer venue or anything, but that it had kind of a queer mentality or attracted a queer audience. Um,
Hmm.
and I'm really interested in how venues or people running the venues or it's just some kind of magic ingredient makes that possible and makes that happen, and without being like, hey queers, come here,
Right.
they're able to attract that audience. And yeah, what is it about Psychic City that was able to do that?
Well, I don't think it was the space specifically, although one thing about the space that did allow for that magic that you're describing to happen, and to spark in that particular space is that the people running the venue really had this sort of like anti bigotry, anti violence, anti hate speech sort of policy, way before many venues and even festivals adopted literature that was very explicitly that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So Psychic City really had like a zero tolerance policy for racism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia, right off the bat. That was really very clear. Again, at a time where that was not common for venues and spaces. So I think that was a fundamental aspect of why that space became adopted by queer artists and why it became the sort of venue of choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also, I think Trannavision was one of the first regular shows to start happening there. And I
And once
think,
they knew you were there, they were through the door. Is that what you're saying?
well, I'm not saying that I was entirely responsible, but my show, not intentionally, but just sort of organically, especially based on the concept of the show and the film choices, the films that I chose are movies that have a very queer cult following.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and those are just the movies that I have just that I naturally found my way to in my life. It's not calculated. But Trannavision attracts like a predominantly queer audience. And if not specifically queer, like a very queer friendly audience. Like, I mean, if you look at my audience, it's predominantly female and or queer.
Mm.
And a lot of the people who come to my shows are also artists and creative people themselves. So I think that, people would come to my show and the other shows that were happening at Psychic City as well, and then become inspired and be like, wow, I've never even heard of this space, or I never even knew the space existed. And all you had to do was like send a message to Psychic City on Facebook and be like, here's what I want to do. Is this date available? It was like very easy,
Mm.
And I think it just grew from there. It grew from
Mm.
those first few handful of shows that were pretty queer in spirit, that drew a queer audience, and that audience became inspired to create their own shows, and it just grew and grew from there.
Mm. Can we just like quickly sidebar off and talk about queer cult films? Like now it's a bit different because if I was like a baby gay and I went online, I could kind of get the manual and get all the instructions and think,
Yeah.
oh, I watched this film and then I watched this film and then I watched this film. But like, growing up in suburbia and not like just having like no kind of uh icons, that's not the right word, no one to look up to or kind of no queer media to consume.
Yeah.
Isn't it fascinating that just so many queer kids gravitated towards the same shit?
It's the most fascinating thing. Honestly, I was talking about this with a friend just the other day. I really can't explain it, obviously, but we did. We did. A lot of us had a natural calling towards certain films. I mean, I remember it just being a kid in the 90s in the video rental store,
Mm,
and how, without knowing anything, just looking at certain movie covers, like the covers on the box, and just being instantly drawn to them. Like I would
yeah.
just go stand and like stare at some of those covers. One of them was Death Becomes Her. I remember
Uh-huh.
staring at that movie box cover in the video store. I guess it's the glamour, I guess that's what I was always sort of fundamentally drawn to in some
Yeah.
capacity.
But like, if you think about Showgirls, that was kind of, I mean, as far as I know, that film was made to kind of titillate heterosexual men. And obviously it
Yes.
went like terribly wrong. But all of the promotional material, everything about the campaign to promote that film was targeted to straight men. So
Yes.
how the hell has it like me as like a young gay going to the video shop be like, I think I want to watch this.
Well, I think part of it was like it is the cover art, it's that's what drew us in, I think,
Yeah, like so like a
primarily.
naked lady, like that's not appealing to me. Why was I drawn to it?
Well, she's not fully naked.
Okay,
She's
okay.
she's exposing she's exposing her leg from this like
This
black
weird S
background.
shape.
Yeah, this weird S shape. That's what drew us in.
Because we love letters, is that what you're saying?
I think we it's that idea of dress up, and wanting to channel certain energies and figures, like for me, like I that was one of my favorite things as a kid, was like wanting to play dress up, wanting to pretend to be different characters. And
Mm-mm.
I think that the characters on all of those movie boxes, from like Showgirls to Romy and Michelle's High School Reunion, um, presented these possibilities for dress up and character play, and there was an over the topness even in just, the VHS box covers that was appealing to us. It's the same way, like I was talking about this recently. I was talking about Madonna, and how when I was a kid, like I didn't really have much of a concept of who she was. And my like first entry point to the world of Madonna was actually Evita. And I was only like 8 or 9 at the time. And I saw the trailer for Evita on TV, and I don't know what it was like, but I just, and I remember telling my mom, I'm like, I have to see that movie. And she took me to see it, and then I became obsessed with the soundtrack, and then through that I discovered the rest of Madonna's work. But I had no idea who Madonna was. So for me at that point in my life, it wasn't like, oh, I have to see Madonna's new thing, or like this is a Madonna movie. I didn't even know. I didn't know who she really was. I didn't know that she was this queer icon, but I saw that trailer and it was a calling.
I mean, if it was Desperately Seeking Susan, I would be like right there with you. But Vida, really?
I know, but that's what I'm saying. Like it doesn't make sense. But she was calling to me. It's like all these movies that were never intended to necessarily appeal to queer children. They there's just something in them that presents a calling.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
it's like this almost like, how like only dogs can hear certain sound waves. It's like these movies were putting out this sound wave that like
Just emitting
most
this
queer, yes,
sonar.
they were. And most queer kids picked up on it. Not all queer kids, obviously. Not to say that all queer people have the same taste and everything. That's
Oh,
obviously
they're
not.
all the same. They are. Yeah. Um,
But that's what the proof that, like you said, like, now queer kid can go online and just Google like queer movies and they'll get lists. But we had to listen out for that, sonar beep. Um, and it will always remain unexplainable. I don't think that it can. I mean, we can. There are reasons, but fundamentally, I don't think it can. It's a phenomenon that can't be explained. It's the
yeah.
same way that like in music, that so many straight women artists have these massive gay followings, and they're always asked in interviews, like, what's up? Like, what is going on with you and gay audiences? Why do gay people love you so much? And none of them can ever fully answer it,
Mm, mm,
And maybe it shouldn't be answered.
yeah.
Maybe it's just this beautiful part of being queer that we get to experience. It's like being in on this secret that our straight counterparts like have nothing to do with. It's our secret garden, these movies.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I feel as though with music I can kind of get my head around it a bit more because music is something that you consume before you purchase it in most cases. But with films, like you are just taking a gamble
Yeah,
based on like the cover and things. And I
exactly.
find it like fascinating that like you in Canada, me in Australia, someone else in the US, someone else in the UK, like all like with different cultural references, different backgrounds, went to the video shop and was like, "Oh, I really want this Nomi Malone flick."
Exactly. And it's so funny because, you know, most of the queer friends that I have, like, I didn't grow up with. I met them much later on in life. And they all loved those same things when they were kids. And we were all sort of off in our own little corners in the suburbs where we felt like we were the only queer
Mm,
kids. But
mm.
we didn't know that, like, throughout the whole world, there were all these other kids just like us watching the same stuff. Like, for
Oh,
me, the first one was really The Wizard of Oz when I was like 2 years old.
oh, yeah,
And I
right there.
think that, but all the straight kids watched that movie too, but it did not do to them what it did to me and us, you
Mm.
know? Like it changed, I don't know, it was a calling. Like it sort of laid the foundation for my entire personality and just way of being in the world. Like it was not just a movie for me when I was a kid. It was like this entry into something else. It was a portal.
And so where do you stand on Return to Oz?
Oh my God. I saw it when I was a kid, and I have no memory of actually watching it, but I know that I watched it as a kid because it traumatized me. And
Was it
I
the
had
Wheelers?
nightmares. No, it was Princess Mombi
Oh,
and her
oh, okay.
heads,
Oh, yeah,
that
that makes
room with all
sense.
the heads. Honest, I legitimately had nightmares about this my whole childhood and even into my teen years. And to the point where, for a long time, I didn't even know if that movie really existed or if I had just imagined it. And then, like, when Google and the internet became what it became, at a certain point, I remember Googling, I guess, I don't even remember how old I was, but late teens, let's say, and Googling, like, horror version of The Wizard of Oz. Because I'm like, I have to find out if these memories or these nightmares that I've been having my whole life is rooted in something real, or is this truly just a figment of my imagination? I had no idea if these memories that I had existed for real or if they were just something I made up. And then in that Google search, I found out about Return to Oz. And then I found like a DVD copy somewhere and I watched it and I'm like, this is the source of all my nightmares. This is it. This is what I saw.
And so was that cathartic, or like have
Yeah,
you
it
gone
really
on to
was.
okay, all right, good.
And I think it's brilliant. Like I love Return to
Ah,
Oz.
so good. It's so
But I like, and I think at the time, like that's partly why it was such a commercial failure is that first group of parents who took their kids to see it
good.
opening weekend
Like what the
told all the
fuck?
other parents, like, don't fucking take your kids to see this. Like, it's next level terrifying.
Yeah, but I mean, that's why it's so good.
That is why it's so good. And I do think that it's important for kids to watch things that spook them, you know? To just have a childhood where all you saw were like Care Bears, like that's not
But
interesting.
I mean, Eve, but like the Wizard of Oz has scary moments as well.
But you know, like even from the time that I saw it, from the first time when I was two, like I had this instant love for the witch. I never was scared of her. I loved
Like
her.
the Wicked
The Wicked
Witch.
Witch of
Yeah.
the West. Yeah. I loved her from the time that I first saw it. And then I was her for Halloween when I was 3. Like I was never scared of her. I really saw her as glamorous, you know, like her first appearance on screen in that red smoke explosion is like, to me, like that's on the same level as like Madonna emerging from the disco ball on the Confessions tour. Like it's the same level of glamour and the idea of like a diva making an entrance, you know? Even in Showgirls, we see that with Nomi, like when the volcanoes are erupting and
Ah,
Nomi
yes.
and Crystal, sorry, just emerges. You know, like these like over the top glamorous entrances is something that I've just like always been drawn to, and it starts with The Wizard of Oz.
And so did you try and imbue that into Trannavision then? Did you
Like
like
that
throw a smoke ball
nostalgia.
down before you came in?
Oh, well, considering that there was no emergency exit, like definitely we're not fucking around with fire in Psychic City or smoke or any of that. No, but I've always dreamed of it. You know, like I've always I think I've always had that fantasy of like putting on some kind of like larger than life show where I would get to do those kinds of things. Or one of my biggest dreams of all would be to like be in a cult movie, you know, to be in a movie that is like critically panned, everyone fucking hates, everyone rips the movie to shreds. But then in the midst of all these shreds, the queer people come and like start picking up the shreds and start putting the shreds back together in a way that makes sense for them. That's my dream, to be part of something like that, because you cannot plan that. You cannot plan that. If I were to try to make something that would appeal to a queer audience in the way that Showgirls does, in the way that even Cats did last year, Cats was the first movie since Showgirls to really do that. But you cannot plan that because what you're making has to be intentional. It's sort of like with the movies that I was choosing with Trannavision. It's like the movies have to have been made unironically.
But the thing, so okay, so you are Elizabeth Berkley. You you have like, oh, I've landed this film role. I am going to shed my typecast teen sitcom roots and I'm going to like make something and I'm going to be a Hollywood star. And then the film bombs and your career is like fucked. If some fag came up to you and was like, "Oh wow, I love that film," you would just be like, "Piss off! I just do not want to hear this." Like, how long do you think it would take to get over that, like that heartbreak?
20 years. It took her 20 years. So
20
I don't
years. So
remember
you'd be
exactly.
quite happy to be like in that wilderness for 20 years as long as at
Okay,
the end.
but if yes, if I were Elizabeth Berkley, but whereas if I were myself, you know, I just as a queer person know things that Elizabeth Berkley didn't know when she was 25. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So for me personally, if I was in that situation, fuck yeah, I would milk it right away. And like that first fag that would come up to me and be like, I love that movie. I'm like, thank you. Like, you're
Do you want to buy a
right.
t-shirt? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'd be milking it from the get-go. But I understand, like, in exactly as you laid it out, for Elizabeth Berkley, it was devastating. You know, it was supposed to be this big thing, and so many people were up for that part, you know, like it was supposed to be this big thing. And she got it, and it was a disaster, and people were awful to her and ripped her apart. And it was a really devastating experience. But when they did the 20th, I believe it was the 20th anniversary screening at the Hollywood Bowl, and she showed up, and there were like, I don't remember how many thousands of people there for the screening cheering for her. I cried when I saw that. Like,
Mm,
it really made me emotional, you
mm.
know, because I think that Elizabeth finally reached this point in her life where, like, it was worth it. It was worth it because the movie did actually end up meaning something to a lot of people and becoming a part of people's lives in a way that most movies just don't. Even the good ones, you know,
Mm,
like
mm.
the ones that are critically acclaimed and that win a bunch of Oscars, they don't live in the everyday hearts and minds the way that Showgirls does for so many people. That's incredible. To me, to be part of something like that would be so much more meaningful than being part of some like critically loved, you know, artful,
But
what have
ultimately
you.
boring. Yeah.
But ultimately boring and
Yeah.
ultimately something that people watch and appreciate, and that's it. Whereas like the diehard Showgirls fans, like they're quoting that movie in their everyday lives. They watch that movie like every year, if not more.
They eat
Like they,
hamburgers really violently.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. They give lap dances to the point that a person will come in their pants. They
They've
like
always
do
got water in their ears because of the way they writhe
exactly.
around swimming pools.
Exactly. You know, like I really like, and I think that Elizabeth finally understood that, you know? And I think that for many years she didn't know that that's what was happening underground with the movie. And then when she went to that anniversary screening and saw it firsthand, you know, and felt that love, that wave of love coming at her, because that's the thing too, is like, of course, there are parts of it where we're laughing at the movie, but we genuinely like love it, you know, and we love her
Yeah,
for
we're
doing
rooting for
it.
Nomi. Yeah.
So, like, you know, when she went to that screening, it's like no one's laughing at you. Like, we fucking love you, Elizabeth Berkley. Like, we fucking worship you.
Oh.
Like, like that's beautiful, you
Um,
know? Yeah.
um, so Psychic City. Now, when you are performing or presenting, lots of people want a piece of you, lots of people want to come and talk to you afterwards. Did anyone do that to you and were they particularly flirty?
Oh my God, no, they're never flirty. It's like this is gonna sound so egotistical, but it's my favorite part of the show is after when people come up to me. Um,
Oh, really?
and yeah, I always make myself like very available to people
So you're like, that's
after a
the end of the
show.
show. I'm going to be sitting over there. Make a cue.
Well, I don't actually say it, but I like so when the show is over, so at Psychic City, for example, like when the show was over, I'd thank everyone for coming, final cheers. People would start leaving. I would pop into the backstage area, just to thank, the panelists. But I would only be back there for like a minute or two. And then I would go and like hover at the back of the venue where people have to walk by to leave. And I would just hover there. And I still do it now. Like I'll do a show, the show will be over no matter what venue I'm in. The show's over, I pop backstage, I like count to 60, and then I go back into the main room and stand by the exit.
Why bother counting to 60?
I know, I'm just kidding. I don't actually count to 60. But no, I think like you have to, I can't just walk from the stage to like the back of the room, like that's not, you just can't do that. There has to, like, I think there are certain codes in performing, like in the same sense that like you wouldn't be sort of like hanging in the main room before the show starts and just like walk up from the audience, There's just it's just this little protocol or little traditions, like in the same way that like, bands like have to leave the stage and then come back on for their encore. Like technically, why do you have to do that?
Yeah.
So it's sort of the same thing. I think the reason that is a moment, like that sort of encountering people after the show really means a lot to me is because there was a really long, like, I was never like a child star. I was never a child performer. I was like a wallflower just trying to be invisible, but that had this performer energy in me that was so profound, but never really knowing how to channel that and not having the confidence to put myself out there in the world as a performer or as an artist. But being such a diehard fan of music and film and worshiping, particularly pop stars and the musicians that I, was really attached to as a kid, like Alanis Morissette and Madonna and so many of them. So for me, when I'm doing a show and someone comes up to me after and tells me that it really meant something to them or that they had the best time or that they thought it was so funny, it's like that's been me my whole life. Like I'm that person going up to, the singer that I just saw at the end of the show or waiting for them outside the stage door and just wanting to tell them that I loved what they did. And so there's this part of me at the end of the show when someone comes up to me that like I can't believe that in my own small way I am on the other side of that now, because I never thought I would be. I never thought that I'd be on that side of things.
But do you not just find it like really awkward sometimes?
Sometimes it's really awkward, yes, but I find that there's a sweetness in that awkwardness. It's never a painful awkwardness, Sometimes it's more that it just goes on a bit too long. And I think like in the times where like I've waited for someone backstage or like at their stage door, like wanted to talk to them, like I think that I'm really good at sensing when, the scene's over. So it's like I've said what I wanted to say, we've had our little moment and I move on. I don't you know what I mean? Like I never overstay my welcome.
But
not everyone's aware of
that.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of people who can't read or can't sense when the moment has come to a close, But
well, see,
it's never so awkward that like I want to jump out of my skin. Like again, there's just a sweetness, I think sometimes people, and also like this maybe sounds egotistical, but I really don't mean it that way. But sometimes I think the babbling or the things going on too long is because they're like a little bit intimidated and they're nervous and they don't really know what to do with that energy. And I just find that kind of sweet. And I'm also kind of surprised that like I could produce that feeling in anyone, because I'm just me, I'm just here, And I think in that sense, it's also taken away a lot of the mystery or the excitement around meeting people for me, to be honest, like it doesn't, to me, like doing that stage door thing or waiting to like take a picture with someone or get their autograph after a show. Like since becoming a performer myself, it's really lost a lot of its appeal. honestly, because it's like we're all just people. Like, there's nothing that special about any of us at the end of the day, that like warrants this reaction of someone just like bumbling over you and
Yeah.
praising you,
But
like we're all equal.
and I think that's why I don't like talking to people after performing because I feel really like, I mean, I'm awkward at the best of times, but I feel really like, oh God, please don't say nice things to me because I'm not going to know how to respond.
Well, I mean, but maybe, what am I trying to say? I obviously there are compliments and critiques that I take more seriously than others. You know what I mean? Like one time, like the most surreal moment I think in my entire life so far is, and I won't tell the whole story; it's too long. But just to really boil it down, I did my own sort of solo comedy slash music performance in New York City. And my comedy hero, Sandra Bernhard, came to the show, not randomly, but I won't go into the whole history. But she came to the show. And then after the show, she came backstage to see me and like hug me and be like, you knocked it out of the park. Like, you have it. And it was such a significant moment in my life, like it just was so affirming to me to have like my hero come to my show and then come to see me after. So there is something special, like that moment that you're talking about, like the after show when there's these social interactions between the audience and the performer on a more personal level. I think they're important to the whole performance experience. I think they're part of the moment. I think they're an important part of the moment. They're not always significant, but there's something about that post-show exchange that, I don't know, to me can be really beautiful and moving sometimes.
So you're saying I should just suck it up and get on with it?
I mean, no, I'm not saying, because you have to do what you feel comfortable with. I feel comfortable in those moments. And I think that as corny as it is, and as much as I would love to believe in that I am this like completely self-fulfilled, self-reliant person, and I've seen how that can also be toxic in its own ways. There's still a part of me that wants to feel appreciated, you know?
Yeah.
And I know that sounds really corny, and maybe we're not supposed to admit that we want that, but it makes me feel really good, and it makes me feel like I'm doing something that actually has a purpose because it's meant something to someone that's been there. So I like to hear it because otherwise I don't know it, because I don't have I guess without hearing it, I don't fully believe that it's real.
Yeah. Yeah, I can appreciate that. So my original line of questioning was basically, did anyone snog you at Psychic
It only
City?
happened once. No, no one snogged me in Psychic City. Because I think that as a trans person, especially when it comes to like the straight men that are interested in me, which is like my biggest demographic, romantically speaking, they're just too intimidated. Even if they want to be flirtatious, there's this whole like, sort of gay panic that's rooted in some kind of misogyny, and just people never flirt with me openly and easily. Unfortunately, that's just not a thing for me. So
Oh.
no one tries anything. No one tries. Only once it happened at this other venue, which actually is just up the street from Psychic City, called the Wiggle Room, which is like a burlesque cabaret club where I've done a lot of shows. And one time I did snog there with someone from the audience who approached me
Oh.
confidently.
Oh. Are we going to get more details?
Well, there's really not much more
Oh,
details than
okay.
that, honestly. He was like a regular at the shows there, and just a really great, cute, sexy guy. And we had a little flirtation, and yeah, it just led to a little snogging.
Oh.
Yeah, and he's like, I guess, straight identifying, or bi maybe. But all to say is that like that never happens to me. Like after shows, or even when people like DM me, it's no one's ever trying to screw me. which is like a bit frustrating, but also
So,
I'm I'm glad to not really have to deal with that because I'm not good at turning people down. It makes me feel very uncomfortable.
but like, so you don't, you don't regularly experience the magic of dick pics in your DMs.
No, not on my social media. I get a lot of dick pics on the dating apps.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Oh, okay. Well, that's okay.
yeah, but not like I don't have someone like messaging me on Instagram being like, "I saw your show last night. Here's my dick."
It made me
Although it
want to
did
run
happen.
home and trim my pubes. Here's my dick.
But one time, someone who had come to one of my shows sent me a DM like the next day and was like, "I was at your show last night. I really loved it. Um, I like." He just went on with like all these like really, really lovely compliments. And I was so unaware that he was actually hitting on me. Because then after I was just like, oh, I'm really glad you enjoyed the show. Like, thank you so much. It's so nice to hear that. Um,
XOXO.
yeah, exactly. Then he responded with like, and I'm not just saying that because you're sexy. And I'm like, oh my God, what? And he is so hot. Like, my taste in men is like very like generic 90s soap opera hunk sort of, situation.
Like Joey
And he,
Lawrence.
yeah, kind of, but like even like more beefy, more just
Like
like
someone from
someone who would be on
Baywatch.
yeah, like Baywatch or like someone that would be like on the cover of like Men's Health magazine, like a
Hmm.
beefcake, like
Okay.
90s beef. And not that this guy totally was that, but in a lot of ways is. And so like I'm just so not used to it. So maybe sometimes it's happening and I'm not aware of it. Like maybe sometimes I'm not aware of the ulterior motives.
Well, you better pay more attention next
I
time you
guess
run to the
I guess I
door waiting for
better.
people to leave after the show.
I do it more. I'm not that obvious, but maybe I am. But no, I do. I like to be available to people at the end of a show, just because I know at the end of a show that I go to, like sometimes I want to like go up to that artist and be like, I really loved what you did,
Yeah.
because I know that to that doesn't mean something to every artist. For some artists, it's like thanks. They don't really, they're not moved by what you have to say. They don't care what you took out of it. But I do. I care,
Yeah, and again, this is like where my like the fact that I'm so socially awkward comes in that I can't do that with artists as well. I can't be like,
Right.
I really enjoyed it because of this, and this, because it just comes out like, oh, but that it was good.
Yeah, right. And that's totally fair. That's totally fair. I mean, I remember like even going to shows with like friends of mine and like going to see their favorite artists. And then we'd be like, outside the stage door waiting for them. And my friends would be like so nervous. They'd be like trembling. I'd have to like do the talking for them. And like I do get nervous and a bit awkward when I am like, meeting a hero or an artist that I really love. But to me, like the thrilling part of it always outweighs the sort of
Yeah.
scary awkward part of it.
Well, I think there's also like how, I mean, not if I go to a show for someone who I've never seen before and then want to say to them afterwards, I really enjoyed that. But if it was like someone who I was just like, oh my God, this person like has soundtracked my life and has been so important to my development as a human being and the way I think and the way I approach music, blah 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 blah. Like, how can I go and then encapsulate all of that in 30 seconds?
Well, you can't. But the flip side, well, first of all, there is a danger to meeting the people who mean that much to
Yes, of
you.
course. Yeah, yeah.
So you have to know that there's a risk. But in the handful of times that I've done it, it's always gone well and it's always been worth it. But if I went up to someone who, is all of those things that you just mentioned and they were awful to me, I would be really devastated.
But it's not even if they were awful, if they were just so, like if they were just a human being.
Right. I know. But I think that because, like, for the people who really have meant so much to me, like, Alanis is one of those people for me. And I did meet Alanis once very briefly. It was after her show. We were waiting at the stage door. and she came out and there weren't many people around. And so she was able to take like a little time and like take pictures and sign stuff. And I had laryngitis at the time, so I could barely speak. I had lost my voice. Um, but and it's so stupid and it's so corny, but I was just like, obviously I couldn't say everything that she's meant to me, but I literally was just like on behalf of my like 9-year-old self, can I have a hug? And we hugged.
And then you gave her laryngitis?
No, that's not contagious that way. And it was just like really sweet, you know? And I could feel her openness. Like I would not have been comfortable to just ask that to anyone, you know? But you just have to pay attention to the energy of the moment too, you know?
Yeah.
I think you can, if you're paying attention, you can tell who's receptive to hearing how much they mean to you and who's not. I usually find that energy is pretty clear.
Yeah, I guess the risk comes in when you're like planning.
Yeah. But
And
I just feel like when someone really means something to me, it's like, I don't know, in this weird way, it's like you kind of want them to know you exist, you know? Even if it's just for 30 seconds. I don't know. That's just me, I guess.
yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I just I'm always assessing the risk and assuming the absolute worst is going to happen.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
avoid these things.
To me, like my always like the biggest fear or like the biggest risk is that there just won't be a meeting at all. Like that they're like like when we were waiting for Alanis, like there was no guarantee that she was going to come out, you know, or
Mm-mm.
that she hadn't even already left the building. For me, like that's always like the worst case scenario. I think that because I also trust that, at least in the times where I have gotten the chance to like meet a hero or someone that I admire, that because the love is so genuine, I really think that they sense it.
Oh,
And I think that I know where I'm coming from, and I know that I'm not like a psycho weirdo that's gonna like stalking them for the rest of their life. So, like I know that this is harmless for all of us.
yeah. Well, I think I always come across really deadpan, and so people can't tell if I'm being serious or
Right.
not. So,
Okay, that's fair. I think like I don't know, I come off, well, I don't know. I guess I have I guess there's a warmth to me. At least in my
yeah, I
experience,
don't have that
it's
warmth.
like
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
like what people pick up on. Like I remember even like meeting Tori Amos once. She would, and I think she does this on most of her tours, like she comes outside the stage door like before the show. And it's sort of like a known thing amongst her fans. And when I had seen her, like I was a relatively like new fan.
Mm.
Um, but I just remember her just like kind of taking a liking to me and just like we were talking and it almost became like a show for everyone else that was there. Like just this like moment. But yeah, I think it's up to everyone to decide how they feel about those kinds of moments. But I love them. I
Mm.
think they're important. I
Mm.
think it's important for audience and performer to mingle.
Okay, so Psychic City disappeared overnight. It's no longer. What what does Montreal miss now that it's gone?
Well, I mean, largely what was lost, we regained with the diving bell. So I don't feel like, I think that the loss was thankfully temporary. Because if we had lost Psychic City and a space like the diving bell had not replaced it, we would really be missing a space that would allow artists to create um, in a way that is not a financial risk, which is so important.
Mm.
Like I've looked at other venues in the past and like renting them out, and it's like there's just no way for me to make a profit here. Like the rental fees are so high. It's crazy. It's not feasible,
Mm.
Especially when you're doing a low production show. It's like you can't really charge that much for the tickets, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so Psychic City really offered a kind of freedom to create without the financial burden that we usually face when it comes to putting a production together. And I think that because it was underground and it was so chill, and there wasn't this like financial pressure to make what you're doing a success, there was room to really be experimental. And maybe that's what we're missing a little bit still, is just a space where you can work out what you want to work out, without really having to worry about anything outside of that. If there's 5 people there, you're not going to be like annihilated by the financial ruin of the night, And I think that was really valuable. It really allowed so many people to put things together that maybe they wouldn't have been able to otherwise.
Did you ever go to Psychic City? Well, if you did, tell me all about it. Share your stories or photos or whatever you have from those days with me through social media. You can reach me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, yada, 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 with the user handle KAndersonMusic. And whilst you are at it, give Tranna a follow on Instagram. Her account name is Tranna Wintour. Easy, right? Lost Spaces is not only a podcast, but a concept record as well. I've been writing songs about queer venues and the people who used to live their lives there, and will be releasing songs over the coming year. You can hear the first single, Well Groomed Boys, which is also playing underneath my talking right now on all good streaming platforms. If you liked this episode, I would really appreciate if you subscribed, left a review on Apple Podcasts, or just told people who you think might be interested in having a listen too. I am Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces.